One of my favorite kinds of DLCs is always going to be those who take one of the allies of the main protagonist in the base game and tell us their story. In the case of Sam's story for Metro Exodus, it's a little bit funny to think about. On the one hand, Sam was an important character in the novels, along with a good chunk of the Aurora crew in Metro Exodus. On the other hand, he is voiced in English by none other than Steve Bloom, one of the more well-known voice actors in gaming, so I have to wonder if Sam's story was made as either a way to expand on the only foreign character in this Russian story, or if the dev team really wanted to make the most out of having a famous voice actor on board. Either way, it's a win-win for me, because Sam's story ends up being more Metro Exodus, while also expanding on both post-apocalyptic Russia and also giving us the perspective of a different character. Sam's story takes place right after the end of Metro Exodus' main campaign. Knowing the crew of the Aurora is now safe and starting a new life, Sam has decided he won't be at peace with himself until he reunites with his father, or at the very least gets to confirm what happened to him in the years since the war. So after parting ways with the crew, he begins his journey to find a way to travel back to the United States. His travels take him to the flooded region of Vladivostok, where a settlement of survivors happen to have a nuclear submarine that can easily take him home. But the trip won't be free. There is conflict within the sub's crew, and it is up to Sam to find the captain and convince him to return to the sub, and in the process, uncover the deeper problems plaguing Vladivostok's frail social structure. And that's as much as I can say without giving out spoilers. Sam's story is an entire journey. While on paper this essentially is a Fort Huff map for the main game, it expands and picks up some of the better ideas from the main campaign to give you something new, both in terms of story and in gameplay. So let's get the gameplay out of the way already. Like I said, this is essentially a 4 semi-open map. A lot of what you did during the main story carries over, but now you have 2 new guns, a handgun and a new assault rifle exclusives to this chapter, and they feel like a serious improvement over Artyom's previous guns, which makes sense because this time around you're going to be doing a lot more shooting. One of the things the Metro series has always been known for is the invisible morality system. The things you do in combat and the choices you make during story and gameplay get to determine your ending, and it was tightly connected to the themes of Artyom's journey. Sam does not face this dilemma. Because now things are a little more hopeful and the only true human enemies are bandits, you can finally let loose on them. My philosophy with this game is always let for monsters, melee for humans. This time, non-literal stealth are more of do I want to conserve my ammo, and less of do I want to be a merciful soul. This means that even if you make a mistake during stealth, you can simply go ahead and defend yourself with no more repercussion other than risking getting overrun or getting blindsided. Because much like in the main story, bandits are not pushovers, and they will easily kill players who are not careful. That being said, there is a fair share of shootouts and every one of them has felt extremely fun and intense. I'm guessing for a realized sniper rifles were not utilized too much during the main story, because here, sniping is made a lot more fun. Running from cover to cover, dealing with enemies on the ground while the sniper enemies have you pinned down is one of those very memorable sequences I got to enjoy. The level design itself really lends itself to you to just go to town in several places. And at the same time, they give you some fun arenas to do sniping if you really feel like it, and because of the survival aspect of this franchise, this means that if you play things correctly, you can find yourself in your own made scenarios where you can go from being hunted to turn things around on the enemies and become the hunter. And on the topic of hunting, the mutants are still around and they are still as dangerous as ever. There is a big demon that is constantly antagonizing you and provides most of the boss fights for this DLC. I like it because I believe this is the first time in this franchise at least, where one of the mutants becomes a more proper recurring antagonist as opposed to being multiple demons for you to deal with. They went ham with the vampire themes, even giving it its own swarm of smaller bats. It's a lot of spectacle and I really live for this kind of stuff. The other mutants are no joke either, except the zombies maybe. I wish they didn't rely so much on zombies. Since Vladivostok has a lot more water for you to navigate around, some of the aquatic enemies from Last Light and the main story make a return. They are as relentless as ever, and with some of them having their territory in the more irradiated areas, it means you have to keep an eye on both your health and your gas mask, and if you make the same mistakes that I did at first, you can end up with a broken mask and no filters. But that is that for the combat. I've been mentioning a lot lately how learning to play games by relying more on your own eyes to observe the environment more closely has been giving me a renewed love for games. For this DLC in particular, being observant will save your life. Metro is no stranger to booby traps and landmines, and Sam's story decided to up the ante with actual minefields. You are given a mine detector that will beep anytime you are near landmines, but you still need to pay attention. It is risky to move through those fields, but if you play it smart, they can become little gold mines of resources for you to craft more stuff. Or if you have enemies nearby, you can take advantage and weaponize them so they blow up on the enemies instead. With the caveat of course being that explosions are noisy and they will alert nearby enemies, so you have to play it smart. There is a lot more fun stuff with the combat and the enemies, and as much as I would love to mention those, I'm gonna have to avoid doing that, because otherwise I will be spoiling a lot of details for the story and the overall experience, and I really want to see more people play this. So instead, let's talk about both the story and the atmosphere. Much like with the two colonels, Sam speaks and has a voice, and also a lot of things to say. Being voiced by Steve Bloom, it means Sam gets to act a little closer to a typical American hero. But given that he is in Russia, that actually is a good thing. He's not too stereotypical, thankfully. Since he spent decades in Russia, he gets to be a lot more level-headed when the story requires it. He doesn't ham it up often, so it doesn't overstay its welcome. I think one of my favorite aspects of this, much like how Slava was a father trying to do what was best for his son and his station, Sam has his own character and personality. The two-way conversations he gets with the submarine crew are really good, where he is more of an outsider that is earning the respect and a place with new people, and in return, those he meets get to know him and grow to respect him and appreciate him and his abilities. It adds a fun and different shade of humanity to the story. Again, makes me wish Artyom had more moments like this where he gets to shine as his own person instead of having to rely on other characters monologuing for minutes on end to compensate for his silence. The best part for me is that Sam manages to bond with both sides of the conflict. Again, I'm keeping details to a minimum, but I really appreciate that the writing in this DLC is something I don't get to see often, and that is true shades of grey. Remember how I said the only true antagonist faction are the bandits? That is on purpose. The submarine leadership have their own differences going on, but they are leaning more on difference of opinion and ideals, rather than real hostility between each other. So no matter which side of the conflict you are speaking to, you can see they are open to be interpreted as genuine good people. You walk around the submarine and see that the settlement is actually doing quite well for itself. And that for all the limitations of a post-apocalyptic world, humanity does look like they are turning a new leaf. Which of course is not going to be easy considering this is the Metro series, and it doesn't matter who you are playing as, you are going to have to earn your good ending, provided you survive for that long. In Sam's case, whichever ending you decide to do is gonna depend greatly on who do you feel you agree more with. There is no real bad ending or wrong answers, because even if it feels like one is better than the other, in the end that is legit open for you to your own interpretations of what you witness here. Now, if I were to point out a couple of flaws towards this DLC, is that some of the jank from the main campaign carried over and a couple of new minor issues from having a speaking protagonist arrive too. In the former, takedowns are context sensitive. This means in order to pull off a takedown on an enemy, you have to be in the right spot to make the prompt show up and either knock out or kill an enemy guard. This works very well for the most part during stealth, but if you get spotted and you get into a gunfight, trying to get a frontal takedown is a lot more difficult, because for some reason the prompt won't feel like showing up, and that means precious seconds are wasted and you risk getting killed by another enemy while trying to deal with the one you have in front. For the latter, they made a bizarre choice. Keep in mind this DLC came out after the two colonels. Slava talked, but that was mostly safe for whenever he had a conversation. Sometimes during gameplay, Sam will comment on a lot of things, the most frequent one being whenever he picks something up. On paper it shouldn't be a problem because it's not too frequent, but because he only has a handful of lines, hearing him say how something you picked up can come in handy starts to get old. I don't care too much about talkative characters personally, but this was a detail even I noticed and I can see it getting annoying for others, so that was a bit of a miss. Again, I feel this was likely because they wanted to get the most of having hired a famous voice actor. The only other flaw, of course, are the zombies. The humanimals keep showing up. They improved them a little bit by placing them in cramped dark areas, and while fighting them was a little bit better, I would have still preferred a different type of enemy, or at the very least make sure they get to look varied. Add some decay to them, give me hints that these people used to be human, because in the end they are just copy-pasted zombies with tattered underwear. They will always remain the least interesting enemy in the game. But that's enough about the flaws. This DLC may be a little more action-oriented, and some may lean a little bit more into being a cheesy action hero, but like I said earlier, this is still Metro. Atmosphere continues to be king here, and as much as you get to enjoy hanging around the settlements or the hostile ruins of Vladivostok, horror continues to be a factor. The day and night cycle, radiation zones, atmosphere continues to be as overwhelming as ever. You can find yourself driving your boat across a radiation zone, where in spite of having little to no enemies, you have the dread of facing danger, and the toxic atmosphere having your filters slowly tick down, like a countdown to your own demise. Sewer areas can be lonely and gloomy, right up until a worm shows up and it decides it wants to have you for lunch. Even just walking around Vladivostok's more abandoned areas give you an eerie reminder. This place used to be a populated city. It used to be full of life. Now all that is left of it is its memory, as nature has slowly found a way to heal and reclaim the land. And even when the dust settles after a gunfight and the music stops, you get to look around as you scavenge the corpses of your enemies and realize just how even the act of standing and moving around this flooded city hangs by a hastily put together bridge. Even when loaded with guns, you get reminders of how small you really are, how easy you can become the prey, and how lonely this dead world can feel. By the end of the day, I think Sam's story is a great send-off for both Metro Exodus and the Metro series in general. The fact that this entire game was made and completed in spite of the developers having to flee the war in Ukraine is admirable, and I have crazy respect for them for pulling it off in spite of the seriously life-threatening situation they were in. This is why I am giving Sam's story a more than deserved 10 out of 10. Playing something that feels good in both gameplay and story is a testament to a fantastic game. This is why it's important that the sum of its parts lead into something that outweighs what few flaws it may have. It's not clear if they are gonna make more Metro games. If they more or not is their call really, and I do end up working on one or in something entirely new, then I'll be looking forward to it either way. Story-driven games should really learn a thing or two from the Metro series, because even with its own little bits of jank, the human factor in the story and both likable and memorable characters can leave a lasting impression in between some sweet atmospheric gameplay. I also do hope this current generation of games finally leaves behind the notions of silent protagonists, at least for story-driven games that include voice acting. It's important to let players immerse themselves and let them feel like they are part of the story, but so it is to make sure that the player character gets to stand on their own, regardless of player input, because no matter what others can argue, blank slates don't tell good stories.